Imagine, a runaway trolley is rushing towards five people who are stuck in the railing. You happen to be stationed in a control room with a switch that will divert the trolley onto another track. However, the other track has a worker on it too, but only one. What would you do? Are you going to sacrifice one person to save the other five? This is what we call the trolley problem, an ethical dilemma devised by philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967. In a survey, about 90% of the respondents said that it's okay to flip the switch, sacrificing one person to save five. These decisions are influenced by a moral theory called utilitarianism. So, what really is utilitarianism? According to Britannica.com, utilitarianism is an ethical theory holding that actions are morally right if they tend to promote happiness or pleasure, and morally wrong if they tend to promote unhappiness or pain. That means utilitarianism wants us to choose actions that will produce pleasure and happiness, for these are actions that are morally right. It also proposed the ideas that morality or goodness is centered on the useful actions or actions that produce the greatest good or benefits for the humanity. According to Investopedia, utilitarianism advocates actions that foster happiness or pleasure and oppose actions that cause unhappiness or harm. To sum it all up, utilitarianism encourages us to choose actions or decisions that produce the greatest good or pleasure for the greatest number of people. Modern utilitarianism was founded by British philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. However, the theory has philosophical ancestors in ancient Greek thinkers such as Epicurus. These people believe that happiness is our primary goal. Get this, we study hard to get good grades, to graduate, to earn a degree, to get a job and be successful, to travel the world and live our life to the fullest. But why do we do this? What can we get from it? We keep asking these questions, but ultimately, our answer is this: we're doing this to make ourselves happy. Unlike Kantianism, which is a moral theory that follows rationally necessary principles, utilitarianism focuses on the results or consequences of our actions. In fact, it is a form of consequentialism, which holds that the consequences of one's conduct are the ultimate basis for judgment about the rightness or wrongness of that conduct. Now, utilitarianism is also considered a hedonistic moral theory. Hedonism means that all and only pleasure has positive importance, and all and only pain or displeasure has negative importance. However, utilitarianism is not something you can consider an egoistic theory. Egoism means doing moral actions for one's own good. Conversely, utilitarianism is about the majority or the greater good. It means we should go after happiness or pleasure not just for ourselves, but for as many people as possible. Again, we should act always so as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. But doing this can mean sacrificing something or someone. A utilitarian will always choose the actions or decisions that will make most of the people happy, even if that means risking or sacrificing oneself. This moral principle is very common to superheroes, and one of the best examples of this is Iron Man. Now, if you're a fan of Marvel Cinematic Universe or you've watched Avengers Endgame, you'd probably say that Iron Man saved the entire universe from Thanos and his army. Thanos had been searching the Infinity Stones in every corner of the universe, and part of his desire is to assassinate half of the population in every alien civilization. When he came to Earth as his final destination, he fought the Avengers, and in the final battle, Iron Man risked his life by absorbing the powers of the six Infinity Stones and snapped his finger to kill Thanos and his army and save the entire universe, including his family. But the saddest part is his death. Iron Man based his decisions and action on the consequences. If he let Thanos snap his finger, they will all die, including many innocent people, including his family. That is why he surprisingly gathered the stones from Thanos' hands and absorbed their energy to eliminate Thanos and his army. He chose the action that brings happiness and pleasure to the most people, even if that means dying, which is what actually happened to him. Well, that's tragic. Another example to this is Black Widow. She jumped in the cliff as a sacrifice to get the Soul Stone, which is essential to bring back his colleagues from the recent genocide. So much for superheroes. Utilitarianism can also be seen in our history and in the present. Filipino heroes with great feeling of patriotism are also considered as utilitarians. They chose to fight for the people even if that means risking their lives, or worse, dying. They also include soldiers and military in the present time, and they believe in this Latin phrase saying, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. That means it's sweet and proper to die for one's country. But utilitarianism is not always about dying or risking your life. It could also mean just setting aside of your personal happiness to make most of the people happy. For example, you wanted to watch the NBA match of your favorite team on your wide flat screen TV, but the rest of your family wanted to watch their most awaited Korean drama at the same time. As a utilitarian, you would set aside your personal desire of watching the game or the match in the larger screen or in the TV and let your family switch the channel instead. You've chosen the action that would produce the most overall happiness for your family, even though it produced less happiness for yourself. So there are two versions of the theory. When Bentham first proposed this moral theory, it was in a form as utilitarianism, also known as classical utilitarianism. Utilitarianism says that morality of an action is determined by its usefulness to the people. If an action has an outcome that is beneficial to most people, then it is considered morally right mainly because it brings greater happiness or good to the majority of the people. However, some actions that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number are hard to do. A great example to this is an ethical dilemma called organ transplant. Suppose you are a medical doctor and you have 5 patients waiting for a transplant of different organs, namely lungs, 2 kidneys, a heart, and liver. Without immediate transplant, these 5 patients will die. Then, an innocent random man walked into the hospital, and you, as the doctor, now must choose to either let the innocent man leave the hospital while watching your 5 patients to die, or to kill the innocent man and harvest his organs to save 5 patients. Again, as an act utilitarian, you should act so as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. So, you should kill the person and harvest his organs to save the 5 patients. You killed one and saved 5. Is the greatest good for the greatest number. The death of the innocent man is 5 times less bad than all 5 of their deaths. This kind of harsh scenarios has led to the creation of another version of the theory known as rule utilitarianism. This time, rule utilitarianism says that the action can be morally right if it conforms to the rules that will lead to the greatest good or happiness. Therefore, the greater good or happiness can be achieved by following and adhering to the correct rules that apply to all equally. Also, rule utilitarianism wants us to think long term and on a larger scale. Rule utilitarianism allows us to refrain from acts that might maximize utility in the short run and instead follow rules that will maximize utility for the majority of the time. Now we are going to tackle on the similarities between act and rule utilitarianism. Both determine the moral significance of an action by its outcome. Again, despite the differences of act and rule utilitarianism, these two versions of the theory are still under utilitarianism, which again focuses on the results or consequences of our actions rather than the intention. And again, since it is a form of consequentialism, both versions of the theory still believes that the consequences are the basis of morality. So good consequences equal good action. They also both reflect on the consequences or usefulness of an action to a majority of the people, which is the core element of utilitarianism. Now, regardless of the differences on its applications, both versions of the theory give emphasis on doing actions that maximize happiness or pleasure for the greatest number of people. Both versions of the theory reject social customs and traditional taboos, but considers the fact that morality through a certain act or rule is for positive contribution or the majority of humans. Since act and rule utilitarianism consider intention as irrelevant and focuses on the consequences, some actions that they consider morally right are against moral customs and traditions, such as killing an innocent person to harvest his organs to save five for the transplant. Now we move on to the difference between act and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism highlights the morality of an action determined by its usefulness to the people. Rule utilitarianism, on the other hand, highlights the morality of an action is when it conforms to a certain rule that leads to the greatest good of happiness of the people. Again, unlike act utilitarianism, rule utilitarianism wants us to think long term and in a larger scope. That means an action should conform to a certain rule that would lead to the greatest good for the greatest number of people, unlike utilitarianism that does not follow a certain rule and only focuses on the usefulness of an action. At this point, we are going to talk about the three principles of utilitarianism. Number one, pleasure or happiness is the only thing that truly has intrinsic value. This is the reason why utilitarians argued that happiness is our final end. It is the reason why we do things. It is said that we never value anything unless we associate it some way with pleasure or happiness. That means we value something because it gives us happiness and pleasure. We value education, fashion, and health. We value education because it will help us to understand anything and deal with life's challenges, which will ultimately lead us to happiness. We value fashion because it builds up our confidence and promotes attractiveness, and hence, it is linked to happiness. We value health because it keeps our body away from diseases and keeps our body active, which is a good thing, and therefore, it will lead us to happiness. So, ultimately, pleasure or happiness is truly the only thing that has intrinsic value. The second principle is this: actions are right insofar as they promote happiness, wrong insofar as they produce unhappiness. This principle supports that the wrongness or rightness of an action is measured in the happiness or unhappiness that it produces. And the way to do this is to look on the consequences that the action might produce. Good consequences equal good action, and bad consequences equal bad action at this point. This is what made utilitarianism a form of consequentialism. The more happiness is produced among those affected by the action, the better the action is. So, saving five lives is better than saving one life. Although this principle seems sensible, utilitarianism focuses on the result or outcomes of the action rather than the intention of doing such action. And the third principle is this: everyone's happiness counts equally. This principle of equality is quite progressive. It promotes equality among humanity. It has led government to pass policies that would benefit all equally. It is also the reason why utilitarianism is not considered as a kind of egoism, but rather it is other regarding. Now, despite of the popularity of utilitarianism, it has obvious limitations. And one of these limitations is this: determining greatest good for the greatest number is not easily determined. Because we cannot predict the future, determining the consequences of our action is difficult to determine. It is difficult to know with certainty whether the result will be good or bad. This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism. There's a possibility that the expected consequences of an action taken might be affected by different factors and may affect the morality of such action. Now, another limitation of utilitarianism is that it easily produces situational ethics. Situational ethics teaches that ethical decisions should follow flexible guidelines rather than absolute rules and be taken on a case by case basis. Again, unlike Kantianism, utilitarianism doesn't follow absolute rules in taking moral decisions. Due to this, utilitarianism could easily produce situational ethics that follows flexible guidelines that depends on every case. Here are some scenarios that applies utilitarianism.
Imagine you have a group assignment with 5 students, and you've found out that one of your groupmates plagiarized the essay. What would you do? According to ACT utilitarianism, you would go to the professor and tell her about his academic dishonesty. This way, you and the 3 students will not fail the assignment, and therefore will be doing the greatest good for the greater number of people. However, this decision takes into consideration the present without considering that he might fail the course due to plagiarism. On the other hand, rule utilitarianism would suggest that you approach a group member and explain to him why plagiarism is wrong and how to avoid it. This will prevent him from cheating in the future and for the whole group to get a good grade.
My grandmother will celebrate her 60th birthday next week. While we are preparing for the event, she said that she liked a strawberry flavored ice cream, but her visitors prefer to have a cookies and cream. Would my grandmother choose strawberry ice cream for her own pleasure? Or would she choose cookies and cream that will visitors prefer too? Which could be the right action to be done? Utilitarianism is a theory that distinguishes right from wrong based on the result or consequences of the action. If the decision you made gives a happiness to the more people, then it is considered as right. And if the decision you made gives sadness to the most of people, then it is considered as wrong. That is the view of utilitarianism. If I were in the position of my grandmother, I will choose to have cookies and cream flavored ice cream because it will give pleasure to my visitors. I will sacrifice my wants just to make my visitors happy. Also, if my grandmother chooses her own wants, then there is a tendency that the ice cream will not be depleted. So, it is just a waste of money and a waste of food. For me, doing decision that benefits everybody or to the more people is better than I just myself can benefit it. So, the right thing to be done in this scenario is that my grandmother will choose to have the cookies and cream ice cream as it will have the positive outcome and it will also benefits or gives pleasure to everyone.
So another timely and relevant example to the scenarios that applies utilitarianism is during the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has become a massive challenge to the decision makers in the government. Decisions on public policies and health systems were carefully examined through the lens of utilitarianism and by looking onto the consequences that every decision might produce. During these challenging times, they prioritize the need and safety of many people. This testifies that utilitarianism is one of the best and easiest moral approach to promote common good or greater good. It is also an essential to decision-making processes on a larger scale, especially during this pandemic where decisions are made on a national level. And a failure to carefully consider the consequences of actions could lead to a massive preventable loss of life.
For instance, you have a terrorist in custody who planted a bomb in your city, set to detonate in 24 hours. There will be disastrous consequences, and that is killing of thousands of innocent people. However, you find out the location of the bomb. Should it be morally permissible for you to torture the terrorist in order to save those people? So, as a utilitarian, your purpose is to choose the action with the overall happiest or least unhappy. So, you need to torture the terrorists because it would contribute to the overall security of the city's population utility. Torturing one terrorist for the sake of thousands of innocent people. The torture under these extreme circumstances is ethically permissible because it would result in greater quantity of happiness. The public has so great an interest in your doing that the danger of what may arise from you to not doing it is a greater danger even that of an innocent person suffering the greatest degree of pain that can be suffered by torture.
Well, according to crash course philosophy, if you have the ability to stop a killer and you don't, are you morally pure because you didn't kill? Or are you morally dirty because you refuse to do what needs to be done? Today, we learned about utilitarianism. We tackled about the act and rule utilitarianism and its similarities and differences. We studied the three principles of utilitarianism and its limitations. This topic, utilitarianism, was covered by me, Kevin Diguignon, Mirna Canyo, Ace Ragba, Milona Edria, and Genesis Paul Rapon, assigned by our instructor, Mr. Jeffrey Istores. Please answer these questions to test your learning about today's lesson. Thank you for watching this video and we hope you learned something new.